All right, if I could ask everyone to kindly mute while they are not speaking, and then unmute when you do speak. Good evening. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. Welcome also to Mayor Christine Lott and School Resource Officer Jason Sider. Glad you could join us. We appreciate that everyone is coming out on a Tuesday night. I'm Stephen Berbecco, and I'm one of the school board members. Liz?
Yep. Hi, I'm Liz Edsel. I'm a school board member for another week, and will continue to support the school district in this and other anti-racism work as a community member and parent. And I'm sad Kamal Dahal has been joining these. He's running for my seat on the school board and has just had a fever from his second dose of COVID vaccine. So it's a good reason that he couldn't join, but I hope you will all get to know him much more in the next few weeks and years.
Thanks, Liz. We're here tonight to talk about school safety. And this evening's forum is one of 8 community meetings that we have scheduled over the past 3 weeks. We have completed meetings with the Nepali Bhutanese, the Congolese Burundian, and the Vietnamese communities in Winooski. And we will meet with the Burmese Karen, the Arabic speaking, and the Somali and Mai speaking communities later this week. We're using the same slides for all the meetings in order to keep our data gathering consistent. And we'll take notes as we're talking. I wanted to explain a little bit about this meeting and this process. The school board is considering a policy on school safety. The policy has already gone through a first reading, and these forums are a way to gather important information that Liz and I will bring back to the board to help them in making a decision when they look through a second reading of that policy. The input that you give is very important. And again, we're taking notes as we continue through these forums, and those notes turn into information that comes to the board. In addition to tonight and another English language forum this weekend, there are, again, also Somali, Mai, Arabic speaking, and Burmese Karen meetings later this week. And of course, you are very welcome to join the school board meeting and participate in the public comment process. Let's get started. And Liz, if I could ask you to kindly put a slide up for everyone.
Yeah, before we start, I just wanted to note, because our meetings so far have all been kind of interpreted through a school liaison. We haven't had a process for people to like raise a hand, but in your bottom of your screen, if you go to reactions, there's a place to raise a hand there. So as we get into, and this really is to hear from you, and we want to hear from all of you, but kind of raising hand process, and then I can take note of the stack or the order of people to speak. And as we get later in the meeting, if there's somebody who hasn't spoken yet, who's way down on the stack below somebody who's talked a lot, then we might shuffle the order a little bit. That sound good to folks? Yeah.
Thanks,
cool.
Liz.
Yeah, let me lower my hand and share my screen. Hold on a second. Community presentation. You see me?
Looks perfect on my side.
Okay.
So our first question, our series of questions, has to do with what's important to you about safety, and what kinds of experiences have you and your children and family members had when you've come to Winooski School District. What do you think school safety should look like based on your experiences in this country? And what types of experiences have you, your children, and your family members had with the police in the United States or in another country that you may have come from? We would like you to share your thoughts, please.
I thought I saw Christine raise her hand.
Hi, I'm Christine Foley. My kids are not yet in the Winooski School District, but my son will be starting kindergarten next year. I am just curious. I tuned in a bit late. I think, it would be helpful for me to have a bit of a background on like what is the new policy encompassing? What are the goals of it, in helping me answer these questions?
Sure. So the proposed policy it introduces definitions of safety. It builds a scope of what's included in the policy, and it lays out responsibilities for following up on safety-related issues. This first question is a more general question to get us thinking and talking about safety and school safety. The next slides coming up are going to ask more specific questions about what you would like included in a policy about school safety, how broad it should be, how narrow it should be, what you think about when you think about safety. I hope that answers your question.
Stephen, maybe we could start with some of those and then come back to this.
That's a great idea.
Okay.
So the school board is developing a policy on school safety. Policy is a set of general guidelines, and that's different from rules. A superintendent uses a policy to set rules for a school. For example, a school might have a policy that students should wear appropriate clothing when they're at school, and a superintendent would then set a rule that all students should wear shoes. And that's how a policy and a rule can interact with each other. So when we think about a school safety policy, we're thinking about general guidelines rather than specific rules for school safety. So one question that we have is how big a school safety policy should be. A school board can make a safety policy for students and staff, or student, staff, and the community that visits the school. And we would like your thoughts about whether you would like to see one policy for just students, or one policy for all of these together, or what combination do you think would be best?
I need some context. I mean, okay, school safety. What are we talking about in turn? I mean, what does, I don't even know what that means. Are you speaking of, what are you talking about? Particular incidents? Are you talking prevention? What I don't know what you want to know. When you're talking about making a school safety policy based on what? Are we basing it on the assumption that the school is unsafe? Are we basing it on the assumption that the school isn't safe enough? What's the basis for the question?
Sure. I guess most generally, if you think about a school board setting guidelines for any of those different versions of what school safety is, would you like the board to have one policy that encompasses student, staff, and community visiting the school? Or do you think that the experience of students, of staff, and of the community is different enough that each of those would benefit from having their own safety policy?
Looks like Monica has a hand up.
Can you hear me okay? I've had some issues with my audio lately. Okay. I guess one of my questions is if there is currently a safety policy in some form.
There is no school safety policy.
Okay. And then so in response to that, I mean, just my initial sort of reaction would be, I mean, it is hard. I think all of us are coming in with not knowing a lot of the context, but just thinking about in a broader scope, if you want to have a policy that, you know, safety should apply to everyone that enters the school or is involved in the school activities. So that's kind of my leaning, but that could easily change based on more things that I learn. But that's kind of just my initial, as far as there being a general policy, if there's certain expectations that are going to guide rules and such that the superintendent makes, if there's going to be those for a student, I would expect the same for anyone else that's interacting in the school.
Thank you, Monica. Maybe it would be helpful if we gave an example. So for instance, if the school board was considering a safety issue and did not have a safety policy in place, then each member of the board could come to a meeting with a different understanding of what school safety is. Or in the case of this slide, each member of the board could come to a meeting with a different understanding of whether the same ideas of school safety apply for students, staff, and the community visiting the school, or whether each of them have different ideas of, or safety looks different for each of those. By setting a policy at this point, it makes it easier for the board to have a conversation in the future about school safety, because the board has decided ahead of time what is school safety. They have agreed on those definitions. I hope that's helpful.
Stephen, why don't we go to the next slide? And I was also just gonna pop a link. I can't find the chat, which is kind of embarrassing since I'm hosting this, but I was gonna pop a link to the draft policy that we did the first reading of, because it's quite short and it has the definition of the first draft of the sorry, I just realized I'm looking at my second monitor. Hello, everyone. It has the draft of our definition of safety and security, and it's what would then be edited following this conversation. So that might be helpful context, but let me advance here.
I have just a comment, a question. May I proceed? Okay. So I think, I mean, I remember looking at definitions that were sent out and feeling like that was putting the cart, ahead of the horse. Is that just like going out of sequence, where the sense of safety needed to be collectively defined? We needed input in defining what safety exactly means. And I feel like sharing the definitions that were come up with might bias the conversation and might anchor people's thinking. And so I think I appreciate the open-ended kind of forum here and open-ended questions that are being asked. I think one of the things that I'm sitting with now is that by calling it safety policy, it kind of puts a box around it already, with, I guess, because we don't yet have a sense, and this is what Margaret was saying, we haven't had the conversation on like what is safety. We're jumping to, should we have a safety policy? And I'm thinking about how a certain culture might affect how safe I feel in a space, and how we have a bunch of policies around how the school runs that create the culture that that we end up with, and those affect my safety. And so I don't think having so that's like the sense of safety is so multidimensional that it won't fit in one safety policy. So I'm thinking about, wondering, that's what I'm sitting with, wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I'd love to hear from some of the other participants here this evening also about Mugabo's concerns about, are we putting the cart before the horse in creating a definition of safety?
Heather and then Hillary.
Hi, I'm going to go back and forth a little bit and try to answer a question that you asked right at the beginning, which also gets to the point that Mugabo was trying to make. And I apologize if this is a bit long-winded, but I think it might ground us in the direction that maybe needs to be discussed, or at least from my perspective. I'm actually reading from a letter that I wrote to the school board back in the fall, as we grappled with, how to improve our school district and how to become an anti-racist school district. So I'm going to just share one anecdote from that letter that addresses various aspects of school safety. In my first year as a Winooski teacher, I recognized that there were racialized negative undertones that were floated in various contexts, and that there were also moments of overt racism within our school walls. In one situation, I was the teacher of a student who was in clear need of mental health support, but we did not have adequate resources that day to support the student. When the student pushed through the door to my classroom, instead of entering the line as was my policy, I asked the student to stop going forward and wait. I began to close the door. The student didn't wait, and I let them pass, backing away from the door. The student was obviously elevated from something that occurred prior to my class and was not able to sit or relax once inside. I called to a nearby white veteran teacher for support with the student. That teacher came to my room, and I briefly explained the situation, thinking that the teacher might help process with the student, as I was in a classroom with like maybe 15 other students, and help the student get what they needed. The teacher then, in my opinion, aggressively raised their voice to the student and threatened to call our white SRO. The student complied and went to the student support room. Later on, the teacher and I discussed the situation, and I explained the very simple details of it. The teacher asked me if I felt that I was in danger. I was incredulous. I had felt perfectly safe. Without my consent, the teacher then brought my concern to the white administration in the form of a formal complaint, adding it to a list of other grievances of a similar nature about other students by other teachers, saying that my student had put me in physical danger and that I had feared for my safety. This is the definition of white supremacy, white fragility, and racial violence. This mentality speaks to every reason why having an SRO may sometimes do more harm than good. Even with the very best SRO in the world, which I think we might have, to use this level of threat against students creates harm and damage beyond what I or other white teachers can possibly imagine. Simply having an armed police officer to use as a threat guarantees our inappropriate and racist authority, not just by the officers, but by the teachers who call upon them in this way. Of course, this use of threat is not the intent of the district, but it is, I believe, the impact. In my first year, I knew this was wrong. I mentioned it to a few staff members, wondering how the school district dealt with such issues. There was no plan. There was no answer to this. At this point, I was complicit. I should have spoken my truth louder and been willing to be uncomfortable and make others uncomfortable if necessary. My sense is that there is less of this intensity these days, but I still hear teachers' threats. This is last year, and all the students know what the final shoe to drop is. If you refused to take a break, you go to the wellness room. If you refuse to go to the wellness room, we might have a mental health service to support you, but the SRO might also come, and he'll show up in full uniform and armed. No matter how kind he is in full uniform and armed. I hypothetically imagine a scenario in which a disgruntled staff member spouts off one too many times in a staff meeting. It might be me. Undercutting people, maybe being seen as disrespectful, not so uncommon. And to deal with this, the administrators call in an armed police officer to usher the teacher out. Why does this seem insane, but to do it to a child does not? I'm finished.
Thank you for sharing that, Heather. I wasn't aware of those concerns and hadn't read your letter. And I'm glad that you shared it. Thank you.
Hillary was next.
Yeah, thank you, Heather, for reading that. I was just gonna kind of go off of what Mugabo was talking about and um, just kind of echo that, you know, safety is a construction and it's something that it is so vague. I think it's something that you know, we feel like we feel it in our bodies. It's something that our mental health, that our trauma, that what we ate for breakfast, how we got to school, you know, all of that impacts our ability to feel safe. So I think even with, you know, really thoughtful policies and rules around, you know, a very broad term of safety, I think really we have to think about what everyone's coming to the table with. How did someone get to school? You know, was someone walking to school in the middle of the road because they didn't have boots and it's freezing out and like big puddles were splashing them the whole way? So I see that a lot. And I don't really know where I'm going with this besides just I think that safety is a very broad term and I'm curious to see where this conversation goes, because I think when I thought of it, I was in my head picturing a conversation around like the most extreme thing of safety, which is like school violence, like shooting violence and that kind of safety. But I realize, yeah, it goes a lot deeper than that.
Thank you, Hillary. Kari?
Hi. First, I'm just to clarify, so I just use the hand under participants as opposed to reactions. And I've seen some people do the reaction hand that then leaves, like it's temporary. So are we using the one under the participant button?
You can use either. So
Okay.
I think it's good to use the one in the participant button because I didn't realize that the reaction one went away.
Okay. Okay. I did see Christine's hand up at some point. So just in case you had anything, just so you're aware. I wanted something that's coming up for me in this discussion and thinking about safety and safety for whom, and is it the same policy for everyone or different groups? I'm just thinking about how safety and power dynamics, how power comes into play. And so when thinking about safety for who, and I think about a policy which honestly feels very abstract for me and I'm struggling with, but I'm thinking about who in our school community has like questions about who has the least power. And so what does safety look like for those members of our community? And when and what makes creates a feeling of safety? Because with power, there is elements of safety. And so how can our policies or how can decisions reflect that? You know, as an adult, like I have more power, and then I'm like feel like I have more safety than, you know, young people as a white person, as English speaker, and so how those parts of power, I guess, is just, I have both questions about it, and I feel like that is a really important aspect of safety. And then where do we center, how we're centering safety and needs for safety. I think that's all for right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to say, I like how this conversation is progressing, and I'm excited to see how we move forward in this discussion. And Mary, before we get to you, I just wanted to point out that Liz has put up another slide that may help us frame a conversation about what is safety. And the first reading of the policy has three possible definitions of safety. And we would love to hear your thoughts about whether this is what you think of when you think of safety, or should there be something else on that list, or should the list be entirely different? Mary? I'm sorry, you're muted.
I'm late to this conversation and I apologize. I had another meeting, but it seems to me that safety is a constantly moving target, that there isn't a state called safety that anybody can ever reach in terms of physical, emotional, or certainly mental well-being. And so I'm not sure what is behind this. What is the goal here? Students not fighting, okay, sounds good. Students not using a hurtful nickname, sounds good. Student not being depressed. Well, I think a school system has less control over that than we might like to think. So I guess my question is, here we go again. What do you mean by safety? Is it always situational, or is it some kind of state we hope to reach? In which case I'd argue that's not possible. No matter what we do, some kid's always going to call another kid something hurtful. It just happens. So I'm not sure. I guess I want a little more context, and I apologize for not having been here at the very beginning. I'm done.
Thank you, Mary. I'm going to pause if someone else would like to step in.
I think Mugabo has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
Thank you. So I think I want to maybe clarify one thing and lift a couple things. And the clarification is that I don't mean to, I don't think I said, and if I did, I didn't mean to say that like, safety is ambiguous or not clear, because I know when I feel safe in a space and I know when I don't. I wanted to specify that there are many factors that shape or influence how like my level of safety in a space. And so just speaking to the white supremacy culture, the white supremacy in the example that my colleague Heather gave, just hearing that language being used or being in a space where enough of my colleagues or even a couple feel like that's the way to do things, and we have systems in place, behavior systems that support that, that makes me feel unsafe. And so it's interesting to think about maybe using this as a way to start articulating these things, and then looking at how, then maybe using this then as a lens to evaluate all the other policies. So to summarize, safety is not ambiguous; it's clear. I can with some time in a conversation, I can articulate what I might need to feel safe. I don't think it can be contained in one policy. And I want to then also lift what my colleague Heather said on, part of the reason why we're here is that we had our students organize and put forth demands. WASAO, Wednesday Students for Anti-Racism, put forth demands, one of which was the removal of the position of this role. And that demand was rejected, and it has led to conversations of what it means to like what safety means and what does belonging mean. And so I think that's a useful thing to remember for everybody who's here, in case people who have not been part of those conversations. That's a thing. And our officer Jason is here, and it's good to see you, Jason. So, I think the example that Heather gave me a lens that maybe just it's because it wasn't. I think sometimes we mistakenly focused on not even the office, but the person, and that example clearly shows how the presence or just the having the option changes the dynamics. And I thought that was just a takeaway that I want to lift again, so that we can keep that at the top of our minds. And the other one, of course, is the I remember when it was during COVID, and a parent or a big sibling of one of our students came to try and enter the building, and they were met with Kathy Bray, who sits at the receptionist. He sits at the front desk, and from my vantage point, I saw, and we were trying to be careful, we're trying to contain because of COVID, and so this person was not allowed to go in. But I with maybe them not being able to communicate with her to communicate completely in the limiting English language, I saw what was a barking of orders in a way that was intimidating and not welcoming. I would not have felt safe in that as that person. And so what Carrie, another of my colleagues, brought up of thinking about the power dynamics and that safety is very much a function of the power that we hold, feels like something that we should keep coming back to.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine, and then AAL Zubadi, and then Tim.
Thank you. I think about safety in the two ways of like being safe from something. So, everybody who is involved in anything with the school should be safe from physical violence. But then there's also the safety to do something. Everybody who's involved with the school should feel safe in speaking up against any, policy they see that feels unjust or unsafe or prevents students and teachers and staff from doing their job to the best of their abilities. Like there should be, safety is not just safety from things, it's safety to do things and feel supported in that. So that's, yeah, thanks.
Thank you. AAL Zubadi, I'm sorry if I'm...
I think that's a beer.
A beer, okay.
مساء الخير.
مساء الخير. Hi everyone. This is Abira Zubaidi, Arabic Home School Liaison at Winooski School District. We're all talking about safety. For me, safety is very important for every single one of us. Students, staff, community members, everyone. I'm thinking about safety. What are we talking about? Inside of the school safety? Outside of the school safety? Community? Students, staff, and teachers? Everyone is important. When I'm looking for making the teacher feel safe inside of the school, is that the students have to pay for it? So I don't care about their safety? I think everybody's safety is very important. I do want all the teachers feel safe. At the same time, I want all the students feel safe too. We're not gonna give someone safety and the other part has to pay for it. How we can make everybody feel safe? This is the question. I feel as a teacher, as an adult in the building, it's my responsibility to make the students feel safe as an individual. And this is part of education situation. Like before you teach them, you need to make them feel safe. If they are not safe, I cannot teach them. I don't feel like they can accept education in that point. I know there is a lot of accidents in the school. There is a lot of uncomfortable situation. And I went through a lot from this. Special people, students, they cannot talk, they cannot express themselves. They get a really different situation, I would say. That doesn't give me feeling I'm not safe at all. I have been in this school for 7 years so far. I did work with a lot of students in this district. And when they are angry and mad, I'm the one who I feel responsible for to give them comfortable and safe to we start again and we establish a new situation, new opportunity for them. Yes, we can continue, we can do a good job together. So if I'm inside of the building, I'm the one who's responsible for the safety for my students and adults there. I don't know, just my idea. I'm like, it's everyone's responsibility. And I imagine if that students that Heather shared the story about could be my kid. How do you feel as a parent to your students? No one can make a deal with him unless the police officer. How do you feel as a parent or maybe older brother or sister or anyone responsible about kid? And they told you, we cannot make a deal unless we call the police officer. By the way, I love our police officer. And I know how big his heart and how he's like help us all the situation. He will never hurt any students in this school. But just as an outsider of the school, parents or adults, how do you think about that? How do you feel about that? Thank you.
Thank you. Tim, then Luke, then Kari.
Thank you. Just one of the, here we are this evening, and just one of the, many reasons that I love being a member of this community is evident here tonight. People being able to share their voices, their thoughts in a very, back and forth environment. And I like that. I just want to say in its simplest form that, this is really big. It's very complex. And there's a lot of emotionality tied to this topic, and also to keep it as simple as possible to answer the question posed at the beginning is how big should the policy be? I mean, how big is the board willing to make this policy? And it should include everyone. Anyone that enters the building, anyone that's here, that's in our community, that comes on the ground, be it parents, students, staff members, should include everyone. In my role at Winooski School District, I interact with our administration and our SRO on a daily basis. I've had encounters with students at school, on school grounds, with adults in the building, and with parents and relatives coming to the building. And I think that it's important for us to take a look at this policy, across all environments with all those people. And the last thing that I'd like to say before sharing my time is that just wanted to clarify one thing that Mugabo said, is that the WASA demand about removing the SRO was not rejected. it was postponed so we could have more discussion about it. Thank you for my time.
Thank you. Luke and then Kari.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. And I'm going to apologize up front. I'm cooking right now. So something's on the stove top. So like, anyway, if you see me running back and forth, that'll clarify it. Yeah, so I really appreciate everything that everyone has shared. I'm sitting with like a lot. I'm taking it all in. It's generating lots of questions. And there's much that I agree with. So I'm just gonna like uplift a couple of things that have been said and then also point out one other piece that I think is gonna be important to this conversation. So something that Carrie had mentioned is really sitting with me in terms of like the dynamics of power in these conversations, right? When thinking about like the instances where one person's safety comes at the cost of another, or like where one sense, you know, from one person's perspective, what might be safe or what might make one person feel safe could come at the cost of somebody else's safety. And so just how are those types of situations navigated, particularly through a policy? Like how would a policy, you know, support everyone in that instance? You know, so I'm thinking as just an example to ground that, because I feel like it's kind of ambiguous. Given just how multicultural our community is, right? You know, like slapping somebody on the back, right? Or being loud and, you know, and very vocal and expressive might be really culturally accepted from one person's vantage point. And from another, that might be seen as unsafe. And so what I worry is that a policy that's defining safety, if it's not done in a way that, again, is supportive of all cultural backgrounds, that might be centering the experiences of those who are in privilege and who are, you know, who do have maybe perhaps more power within the community than others. So that's something that I'm kind of struggling with and sitting with, is like, how would a policy be crafted in such a way to ensure that we're not centering the safety of some at the expense of others, particularly when the safety of some could potentially be the safety of those who are in power and are experiencing more privilege than others. So that's just one thing. And something else that feels really important is, given the shift that we're trying to make towards restorative justice and restorative practices, I really feel like that should be a space that we're turning to for guidance on language, on policy ideas, you know, around safety and belonging, and certainly like ways of responding to instances where perhaps one person's safety, sense of safety was breached, or whatever that may be. I think this question around like a safety policy is very closely tied with like, how are we responding to discipline and behavior? And so again, I really think that restorative justice in education could be a really important resource that we're using to set any decisions that we're making. So I'll leave it there. And sorry if I'm speaking like broad and abstract terms. It's just been a long day and I'm on vacation. So trying my best to just, yeah, turn my mind off a little bit.
Is it Carrie or Kari? Sorry, I heard Stephen say Kari earlier. And anyway,
It's Carrie.
Carrie.
Okay, thanks. So Luke actually spoke to some of where I was thinking and going and wanted to share. I was thinking in terms of, yeah, this shift in working to really build a restorative justice culture and transformation within our district. And when I think about policy and even like how policy is guidelines that guide rules, and when we have policies that focus on guiding rules, and then in a school we focus on rules, and we focus on rules that are broken or whether they're followed, as opposed to focusing on people and people and how are they feeling safe, how are they belonging, how are they included. And so there's elements of this that I feel are like in conflict, like I'm struggling because it feels somewhat that they're at odds, and maybe it's not really at odds and I'm creating that dynamic. But when I think about like students not fighting each other does connect to physical safety, hurtful language connects to emotional safety, they do. And when we focus on, I guess the depending, how in the policy are we focusing on the people in them? So if there's a fight, how do we focus on not the rule being, we need to reestablish and figure out how to re-control situations and the rules, but how do we have a human-centered policy that centers, that is humanizing and centers humanity, and the process for the or like what happens when this, how is it not, you know, a punitive discipline, that's what the policy is like outlining, when it seems like we are, as a district, the goal is to be shifting away from that. And I really appreciated, I'm like sitting with a Beer's comment, like I'm responsible for safety, and how this is like, how safety is like a community thing that's like co-created. And so when I'm with students, I have to navigate, and like we have to adjust and learn from each other about how do we make everyone feel safe. And there's like give and take, and without the relationships and knowing, like I can't outsource that to other people. Or when there's conflict in my classroom, I can't avoid it to try to reconnect. So I'm just, thinking about how do we really make a humanizing, human-centered policy. And the last thing, just going back to power, I talked kind of more specifically from, like also when thinking about SRO as a position, and thinking about power, and thinking about what type of power lies in police, in the history of policing, what type of power when somebody is armed. I just want to name those very specific power dynamics that do not exist with other people in the school building.
Thank you. Jason, I think I saw your hand up and then it's down. Would you like to speak?
I believe Abir was before me.
I think Abir's hand has been up since before, but Abir, did you have more to say?
No, actually, I did said, I said, yes.
Okay. So then Jason, you're up.
Sure. So I just wanted to address something from Heather's letter, and thank you, Heather, for that. And I appreciate that. And I'm very happy to be part of this dialogue, and especially connected to such an amazing community. It is an honor and a blessing to work in Winooski and to work in this school with everyone. One of the things that I have made my mission in my job is to help teachers when it's appropriate to call me, because I've been called to rooms and had a conversation and said, no, this isn't appropriate for me. And I think that that's important, where I think that educating our educators on when if the SRO, that they think the SRO needs to be called, and then re-educating them on that, and then working with restorative justice within the school. I think this is a great opportunity to collaborate together as a community with restorative justice. I think that that's huge. You know, I've had conversations with Kayla about that and how that looks and how we move towards that, and how as a community, we can all work together with that. So I just wanted it to be known that I help educate those who I work with in our community, that it's important for you to know when is the right time, and have you gone through the steps, you know, that are laid out. And maybe that's kind of what this policy may be helping direct, you know, or when those resources are needed. And if my resource is, and plenty of times, you know, I've helped coordinate direction towards mental health approach versus my approach, because I know that my presence won't be that safety, won't be that comforting piece that the student or staff member needs at that time. And I know that that will escalate a situation versus de-escalate it. So that's just a piece that I wanted to help understand of where I come from, and where I think it's important that as a community that we work together with this, and work building this together, not eliminating something.
Monica?
Thanks. Yeah, I think just to echo, you know, what Officer Zeider just said, I think, you know, the points on this policy is important to create some sort of framework to then, you know, further have these discussions and have a better framework for how the school does handle these different issues. And I think I think it's really great. It's been really insightful as a parent to hear from other parents and also people in the school. Most of the faculty and school board members I have that are here, I have not met. And so it's really helpful. And I think it's good to have the big discussions. But I think definitely moving forward, like we maybe shouldn't get too caught up on some of the semantics of things, and like that in order to sort of gain momentum, we have to keep moving, I think. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think this conversation is important. And I'm excited to see what comes of it. And I think as we answer some of these questions, then we'll be able to, like we're doing, you know, some of those other bigger things will kind of come into play, and those will kind of speak to these specifics. But I think, yeah, I think it's good to just that we're doing this. And I also was just curious, do you guys have a time frame for these meetings? Kind of, you know.
Is there a time frame for these meetings? Yeah, so this is an English language community forum. We have another one scheduled for Sunday. And I think there will be further details that the school administration will send out later this week. And then there will be a school board meeting in March, and public comment as part of that school board meeting.
Great. I also meant that is helpful. And I did want to know that, but I also was just curious about like tonight's meeting, if you have a time frame for like how long these typically go.
Oh, sorry.
Not that I'm not enjoying it, but it's good to have a sense of like how long something's going.
Yeah, Liz and I had scheduled this from 7:30 till 9, so about another half an hour, if that's okay. The conversation has been evolving really well. I've been getting some great notes, and certainly appreciate all of the thoughts and feedback, the concerns and suggestions. And putting an end time on it really has more to do with that small child in Liz's arms and my small child who's upstairs right now.
Class of 2038 right here. Go Spartans. Do we want to move on to another slide, Stephen, or?
Let's do that and see how it inspires conversation.
Okay. Oops, I just messed something up. oh, this is the slide that never works. So let's go onto this, like the reporting and follow up, I think it would be another component. I see Luke also, is that a new hand, Luke? Okay.
Yeah, just a super quick question just to clarify, because I think at one point, Liz, you had mentioned you were going to like pull up the drafted language, and then I don't think we ever saw that. So I was wondering if that might be able to happen.
I was going to do that, and then Mugabo had an excellent point, which was that might steer the conversation a little bit too much. So I am happy to share. It's on the district website under the board agenda. The last board meeting agenda had our first draft of the policy.
Okay.
So I was just kind of hunting for it, and then I couldn't figure out how to share things in the chat. And Mugabo made a great point.
No, that's all good. I mean, I think that just I was just reminded of just the context again, and so if the purpose of this meeting and all the feedback that you're collecting from community members is to ultimately revise that draft, or is it to even question the policy itself? I guess I'm back to being just a little confused on where this is headed. In terms of the board making decisions, that piece.
Sure, I can talk a little bit about that process. So what we did was started with a policy from a widely regarded high functioning district and took their school safety policy and changed the language so that it said Winooski instead of that other district. And then took a look at what that would look like for Winooski if it were adopted just the way it is. This is not how policies are usually adopted by the district. Usually a policy is generated by the Vermont School Boards Association, and then the superintendent brings a new policy to the school board for review and adoption on a cyclical basis. The School Board Association doesn't have a school safety policy, which is why instead we went to another district that does have that policy. And then as we looked at that policy, we recognized that the policy makes certain assumptions just in how it's framed. And those are assumptions that may not mirror what the community feels. So for instance, the policy assumes that it should include students, staff, and community members who visit the school. But maybe Winooski feels that's not appropriate. The policy makes assumptions about what is a definition of an injury. Like, are we just talking about physical injury, or are we also talking about emotional injury and emotional well-being? And is that the full list? And so rather than rely on that policy and have the school board decide based on that policy and the assumptions in that policy, Liz and I have been setting up community meetings like this one to check those assumptions and also the general feeling in the community about school safety to make sure that the second reading of the policy accurately reflects as best as possible the feelings of the community. I hope that helps to clarify things.
Margaret?
So I'm still, is this a response before I resigned from the board and the anti-racism group, at least some person has mentioned that tonight, that the demands that the Anti-Racism Coalition presented to us some were accepted and some were not. And one of those pertained to the SRO. And certainly my position at the time, though I have been consistently opposed to armed police officers in schools, but my opposition had to do with the fact that we had not consulted our community to get a sense of how members of the community felt about that issue in particular. So I am asking you if this is the response to that, because if it is, it's not.
Well, you're right, Margaret. I mean, the words school resource officer appear only one point in the slide deck. We haven't even got to that slide yet. And the focus of the conversation, the focus of the policy is on school safety more generally. Because when the board has been getting together to talk about issues like school resource officer and other issues also, you know, it's possible that the board hasn't had a consistent definition of what school safety is. And so the conversation didn't start from a point of, and these conversations that have happened and will happen aren't starting from a point of agreement about what is school safety. And instead, they're still back on the space of even considering possibly whether school safety includes the emotional well-being of students. I think that there's value in coming to agreement as a board, if the board does come to agreement. I think that there's value in a board coming to agreement about what is school safety when tackling school safety issues.
I'm not sure that's the question that I asked. I asked if this series of meetings is a response to my suggestion that we could not, in good conscience, vote on that particular demand without consultation with the larger community. And so the question is this series of meetings and the creation of a school safety policy, is this the response or a response to that?
Well, there have been heated conversations recently about the school resource officer. And in viewing those, Liz and I recognize that a school safety policy would be an important piece of the board's decision-making if the board were to adopt a policy like that. Liz and I obviously don't speak for the board, and so we can't speak for the activities of other board members and conversations they may be having with the community that may be more specifically tied to your concerns about the school resource officer. Did I answer your question?
Well, I think, you know what, this is a concern that was brought to the board by the anti-racism group. And so that question that issue has never been resolved. And as you know, the reason at the time that I voted no to that particular demand, I think it was number 3, is because, again, we had not done our due diligence and consulted with members of the community on this issue. So my, is who responds to the anti-racism group with regard to that particular demand? And again, is this way of getting to that or responding to that without directly addressing the particular issue at hand, which is the SRO?
Could my understanding, and this has been challenging and confusing for me as well, but my understanding is that the WSD steering committee that's being formed and that the application process is open right now is going to have a multi-stakeholder group working on each of the demands, and that at our last board meeting, in the anti-racism discussion hour, it was asked of the board, should we have a stakeholder group for the SRO? And I said, well, why are you asking us? I don't think we're in charge of the WSD steering committee. But I would see that entity as the place to be leading the type of direct outreach and engagement on the SRO specifically. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. I guess I've been on the board for, a few months, and I'm learning a lot about how school boards work. It seemed like the right role or way in which school boards are supposed to operate is to do this policy governance thing, which is like you develop policy and then the staff implement the work. And so that was part of the impetus for like, what is our policy on school safety? I think we're getting a lot of helpful information on the SRO through the various conversations that we've been having over the last few days. And that will be helpful for the board. But I agree, it's not the direct, like, let's come to terms with this particular demand approach. And that was kind of what I was expecting was going to happen shortly after your resignation, Margaret, or after the demand was kind of withdrawn and a community engagement process was supposed to happen, was that there would be a direct public community engagement process directly on SRO, and there wasn't. So there's been many months now in the interim, and I don't know, but the work is ongoing, I would say. Monica, I think you had your hand up, and then Luke.
Just real quick, I just obviously don't know all of the sort of dynamics that are being discussed as far as school board goes, but I'm very grateful, what Margaret you brought up of when these initial things were happening, that the community wasn't aware. And as a parent, I have just 2 kids in the elementary school. As a parent, all of a sudden learning that there were huge changes regardless of what they were, it was really alarming to think that we were not a part of that discussion, or kind of, and so I'm just really pleased as a parent that the school board and the district has provided these opportunities for families and teachers and faculty to voice opinions. I'm just really grateful for that. And I'm grateful that, you know, for all the different people that are represented here. So just thank you for hearing our voice.
Luke, and then got another hand up.
Sure. Yeah, just a couple of things that have come up just from this recent conversation. And so thank you, Margaret, for really pressing on this question, because I have also felt really kind of confused and struggling with that confusion around like who's responsible for what. And I feel like this conversation has really kind of cycled over the past many months. So one thing to clarify, I don't know if this is going to clarify anything. This is just from my understanding, because I have sort of been on like email communications with the group that's been organizing the steering committee. They've been meeting at times that haven't worked for me, so I've like kind of been included in some of those conversations, or at least trying my best to keep up with like the conversations they're having as they're organizing that steering committee. And they just launched the communication for the application this past Friday. And I know within like the week leading up to that was when the question was raised. I think Sean actually raised this question, you know, knowing that the steering committee falls under the purview of the school board. He said that he didn't feel comfortable with demands 2 or 3 being, you know, having demand groups for those demands, since those demands weren't formally adopted by the school board. Again, this is just from what I understand from those email conversations leading up to it. And so there was some back and forth, because there are some WSA members who are part of that organizing group, giving some feedback, you know, on things that they want to see related to the 2 demands that the board hasn't officially adopted. So I'm feeling a little lost within all of that, and I don't think I sort of asked a question to try to clarify, like, is the steering committee kind of moving forward, and maybe part of the responsibility of the steering committee is to work with the board to kind of make sense of what the steering committee's responsibility is with regards to those 2 demands, because the WSA members made it pretty clear again in these communications that like they want something to happen, whether it's like research groups or working with the board to craft the demands in such a way that they will adopt them. So like, I know that WSA really wants to see some action and doesn't want these 2 demands just to kind of fall off. They're also like very ready to move the 6 other ones forward. So like, that's sort of a separate question, but I don't know if that gives any clarity. That's again, just from my own understanding, trying to keep up with some email communications related to this. And I guess just within all of that, one of the lasting worries that I have kind of seems to echo with a lot of what Margaret's question is getting at, is like, I'm worried that sort of responsibility is being deflected between, you know, different groups. And so then things are delayed and no action actually happens. And so again, I know there are certain deadlines coming up, you know, related to the SRO specifically. And it sounds like this policy safety question, there's going to be more conversations coming up. So I know there's like a timeliness to this, that if we kind of reach a point or delay it to a point, like it's going to have to be pushed off for like another year or so. And so anyway, all of those things I'm just sitting with, but I hope that helps.
Thank you, Luke. And speaking of time, we have about 10 minutes left for the time that we've set aside for this conversation. Liz, who was next in the queue?
A beer.
Thank you. I have one of the parents with me here, and he wants to share his opinion. Mr. Rabia.
نعم. الو.
أنا وياك أنت تقدر تحكي وأنا راح أترجم لك.
أشكرك. السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام.
عليكم السلام.
كيف الأحوال؟
How are you?
أنا سعيد جدا بوجودي بهذا المجموعة.
I'm happy to be a part of this group.
وسعيد أيضا لأنه شفت شخص أنا جدا أعزه اللي هو الشرطي اللي موجود وأحترمه جدا.
And I'm so happy seeing Officer Jason here. I have a lot of respect for him.
سؤالي يعني أنا سمعت اللي تتحدثون عنه وعندي كم نقطة سؤال لأن أنا أب لطالبين موجودين بالمدرسة هاي.
I attend the Zoom from the beginning and hear the conversation, all of it. And I'm a parent for 2 students in this district.
سؤالي إنه هل جميع المدارس اللي في فيرمونت موجود عندهم ضابط شرطة؟
My question is, are all the schools in Vermont has the police officer inside of the building?
والنقطة الثانية إذا يعني إحنا أهم شيء عندنا طبعا سلامة الجميع، ولكن من يكون شخص دون ال 18 سنة يعني بعمر أولادي ما يقدر يدافع حتى عن نفسه بكلمة، أنا كيف راح أكون كأب أحس إنه شعور ابني بهاي المدرسة إذا ما فيها لا أمان ولا سلامة؟ من يكون شخص بالغ أو مدرس أو يشتغل في داخل المدرسة يحس في عدم الأمان. طيب أنا ابني اللي هو 10 سنين وبنتي اللي هي 15 سنة، شو اللي ممكن أحس بيه أنا بحالتهم هذه؟ السلامة للجميع، وأرجو أنه يكون الموضوع بدقة يعني موضوع أنه أنا اشتغلت، أنا محامي بالعراق واشتغلت أيضا بالشرطة وفي تكساس، وعندي معلومات جيدة أنه ممكن يكون في حالة ما توجد سيارة دورية قريبة على المدرسة في أي حالة طارئة. تفضل.
As Mr. Rabia said, he's an attorney working in Iraq and other country, and at USA, he's a police officer too. In Texas, he worked as a police officer. And his point asking, how would my kid feel with their ages, 10 years or 15 years, in the school district? The teachers in this school district don't feel safe with they are adults, they are capable of protecting themselves, they are able to talk back to people and like defend themselves. How is my kids will feel without all of these options, how they would feel safe in the district? If their teacher with all of these options, they don't feel safe. And he's sure like if anyone need help or like can give a call to the police officer and the police officer be in school within minutes. And that's his experience from his job, previous job.
شكرا.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I don't know if how many of the schools in Vermont have a school resource officer. Jason, do you know?
There's about just under 50% have some sort of school resource officer, and that may not be full-time. That may be a district that has one police officer that goes from building to building. And a lot of that is due to how rural Vermont is. And that is because the state police may be the ones that are the primary law enforcement of that district. So they just can't dedicate one officer, but usually they do have a trooper that tries to at least stop by the school. But as far as a dedicated in-school SRO, again, it's under 50%. And again, if that's it may not be a full-time officer within the school.
Thank you. I'm looking at the time and we're nearing the end time for our discussion. I'd like to invite someone to share a final thought or final thoughts as we wrap up.
Margaret? And then Mugabo?
I'd just like to know, if they're 50%, I'd like to know if we're going to talk about policy, what is there, does the Vermont School Board Association have a policy with regard to SROs? And if it does, what is it? And how does the association, or how, on what basis do individual school districts determine who gets an SRO, who gets a full-time SRO, and who doesn't? It seems, it seems a much more, I think, fruitful study for the board to undertake to figure that out, to figure out who gets one and who doesn't, right? The demographic of the schools that have full-time SROs, the demographic of the schools that do not have SROs at all, or that have part-time SROs, because, my question has been from the first moment I walked into the Winooski School District is why a school with fewer than 1,000 people in a bit has a full-time armed police officer. And that question has never been answered for me. If the definition of safety is going, that and the policy on safety is going to answer that question for me, I'm happy to participate in that conversation. But that's the only question that's my question. And if trying to query us to find out if we're going to come to some collective definition of what it means to be safe, I can't even imagine how that would happen.
Thank you.
Mugabo?
Okay. So I'm gonna try to unjumble my thoughts as concisely as I can. So one of the things that I find sitting in, and maybe this is sort of what I was talking about in having a safety policy that cannot really contain safety for everyone. Luke and a few others brought up, that we're moving to, the school has adopted, the school board has accepted the charge to become an anti-racist district. The embrace of restorative justice has not been as clear and as loud, but it seems to me that that's a commitment that we've made in bringing on Kayla as our restorative justice coordinator. And Carrie crystallized this idea of policies generating rules that are then enforced. And often we have a culture of rule following and rule followers and rule enforcement, centering rules instead of people. And that is counter to restorative justice. And so in one hand, the structure that we seem to be operating and within which you feel bound, Stephen and Liz, that you feel bound by this policy governance, which produces rules that are then enforced in a way that is beyond your control. If that paradigm is counter to the restorative justice way of being, which defines safety in its own way, the three pillars of restorative justice are creating just and equitable learning environments, nurturing healthy relationships, and repairing harm and transforming conflict. And that trifecta can bring a sense of belonging and safety. We talked about how Abir talked about how safety as a teacher is her responsibility, and I see it as mine. I can't outsource safety in my classroom. If there is harm done, I'm going to rely on the relationships we've built to work to repair that harm and transform the conflict. And the nature of having rules seems to be kind of supporting this idea of being able to outsource it to someone who can enforce the rule that is clear. Once more, anti-restorative justice. And so, if we seem to be, if we're not questioning the structure that we have within which we're creating this policy, understanding that it's going to create rules that are then going to be enforced in a rule-centered way. If we're moving forward in that direction and at the same time moving towards restorative justice, I feel like we end up in a very confused mess. Yeah, so I just wanted to share that reflection.
Thank you. I'm looking at the time and we're at about 9 o'clock. I want to thank everyone for coming together tonight, for sharing your questions, your concerns, your suggestions. It's been a very fruitful conversation. And speaking for me, it's been very helpful in thinking about the policy work that we're engaged in, the goals that we have, and the steps that we're taking to support our students and their families. As a reminder, there's going to be another conversation like this scheduled for this weekend, and you should look for a notice that will be sent out on Front Porch Forum, on social media, and I think also from the administration to parents and staff. I want to thank everyone again for being honest, direct, for speaking your mind and your heart. I think we're all better for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Liz.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Night. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.